Pitched battles as English and Turkish fans clash in Copenhagen. Paris shoot dead 4 rebels in Sierra Leone gunfight. Guilty, kill a nurse who drugged and raped patients. And breakthrough in search for a cause of Gulf War syndrome.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. English and Turkish fans fought a sickening series of battles in Copenhagen ahead of tonight's UEFA Cup final between Arsenal and Galatasaray. Dozens of people were injured, including 2 Arsenal fans and 1 Turk stabbed. Danish police called it a deplorable afternoon. They fired tear gas, but otherwise seemed unprepared for the scale of the trouble. The match itself went to penalties and Arsenal lost. Our Europe correspondent Bill Neely reports on what went before on the streets.
After 2 hours of tension inside the ground, Arsenal fans left tonight defeated and disappointed. But it's not just action on the field that this day will be remembered for, but battles off it. These are the scenes everyone feared. Open battles between English and Turkish fans in the centre of Copenhagen. The fighting long and intense. It was centred on the main square and at times viciously on individuals. But through a dozen streets nearby, there was continuous rioting. Every attack by fans of Galatasaray met by stones, chairs and bottles from English fans. Every charge by the Turks met with a counter-attack by dozens of Arsenal fans. Some here have been seriously injured. This Turkish man had a gaping head wound, police feeling his pulse for signs of life. It began off the square in mid-afternoon. Turkish fans running the gauntlet between 2 groups of Arsenal supporters. Police holding them back, then after some scuffles, pushing them back. As each side provoked the other, Arsenal fans spilled out onto the square. Turks threw bottles, the English charged, the rest was shame.
The tension which has been building in this square for hours has now spilled over into open violence, and it's very violent indeed.
Danish and British police had labelled this a high-risk game. The risks in this square higher than they imagined. There were many here who waited for this, and when it began, they aimed to wound. A Turkish cameraman was badly beaten. My cameraman attacked by English fans 3 times.
You got it, have you? Oh, no!
The injuries mounted, some Turks wielding knives, 1 Arsenal fan stabbed in the stomach, and there have been many arrests. They'll be thrown out of Denmark. But again, there are serious questions about the police response. They arrived late, fired a few rounds of tear gas, but prevented little fighting, used no water cannon, no horses, no barbed wire, and they had little idea where the fans went.
We try to let them react before we go in, because if we go in earlier, then the press is criticizing the police by that.
Today's violence has been brewing ever since 2 Leeds fans were stabbed and killed in Turkey last month. Many in England vowed revenge. That was played out here today. Many of those hundreds involved on the English side were not wearing Arsenal colours. So another city, another riot by English fans, and this was no tiny minority. Up to 1,000 supporters were involved in the fighting. Tonight, 2,000 riot police are on duty to try to prevent further trouble. Trouble neither English football, this city, these clubs, nor England wanted, but trouble some here clearly did want and did get. Bill Neely, ITN, Copenhagen.
Bill, it's just under an hour after the end of the match now. What's the latest on the streets there?
Well, first and foremost, no reports of any violence either here or in the city centre, and not a clear indication really of a final casualty list or a list of those arrested. The police still haven't compiled a final list. The Galatasaray fans just left a few minutes ago. The Arsenal fans left first. Most of them headed straight for the airport. The worry is what the rest will do. Will they take their disappointment out on the streets and on the Turkish fans? About 2,000 Danish riot police, that's a fifth of the country's entire police force, are on the streets. But after their rather naive display today, there's not a great deal of confidence here that they'll be able to quash the trouble if it begins again.
Well, Bill, did they change their tactics at all this evening after we saw in your report them not really being able to cope in the afternoon?
No, it's a classic case of closing the barn door after the horses bolted. They came in fact, with more police horses and with more riot police, but the riot had already ended by that stage. Amazingly, they promised no change in tactics. They can't use water cannon because they don't have any. So there's a great deal of possibility out there of both sides provoking each other today. The Turks obviously joyous, the English disappointed, and in the middle some rather inept and naive, I think, riot police.
Bill Neely in Copenhagen, thanks a lot. Well, the violence was deplored by the Culture Department, which said there was no place for it in football or any other sport. The Football Association conceded that it wouldn't help England's bid to host the 2006 World Cup. Here's ITN's John Draper.
These are the graphic images of the violence in Copenhagen that police in Europe and in Britain will be studying, picking out the clearly identifiable troublemakers. Officers will be checking to see if those involved are already on police files. Cooperation between international forces is extensive, and information on individual soccer hooligans is circulated widely. Police in Belgium and Holland had already been in training for possible trouble at next month's Euro 2000 tournament. Those training sessions will now take on greater significance. But even beyond Euro 2000, FA chiefs in Copenhagen are worried about the impact on Britain trying to host the World Cup after next.
We deplore and condemn all those, be they Turkish or English, who involved themselves in violence of any kind over the past 18 hours. It's not for us, though, to say at this stage who was to blame, for what, and in what circumstances.
The involvement once again of some fans in violence will put a question mark over Britain hosting major sporting events in future, and in particular the bid for the World Cup in 2006. Officials here at the FA say events in Copenhagen are unhelpful to the World Cup application. Some would say that's an understatement. John Draper, ITN at the FA.
And we'll have a report on the match itself and Arsenal's disappointment later in the programme. British troops in Sierra Leone fought a 10-minute gun battle with rebel forces today and killed 4 of them. They also got involved in the capture of the feared rebel leader Fode Sanko, whisking him away to secure custody. Our Foreign Affairs editor Robert Moore reports.
This afternoon, as vigilant paratroopers stepped up their jungle patrols, it all looked and felt a far cry from the simple evacuation plan that brought British forces here. It was a reconnaissance platoon of elite pathfinders who stumbled on the feared guerrillas of the Revolutionary United Front.
At this stage, the pathfinders returned fire and a 10-minute gun battle ensued. The rebels tried twice to get closer to the bunkers but didn't and were pushed off.
In that fierce pre-dawn exchange of gunfire, 4 rebels died. No casualties on the British side, but one local villager was caught in the crossfire and was treated by British Army medics. Military commanders here insist that this morning's fierce firefight comes well within the rules of engagement. But inevitably, British forces are becoming more involved, militarily and politically. The crowds were out early this morning celebrating the capture of the notorious rebel leader Fode Sanko. The man who arrested him was hailed as a national hero. For Sanko is seen by many as responsible for terror, murder and mutilations. A photograph showed him moments after his capture. Whether to negotiate with him or put him on trial is now a major issue. This evening he's under guard by British Special Forces. Just more evidence of how Britain is being drawn ever deeper into this country's politics and its conflict. Robert Moore, ITN, Sierra Leone.
Here the government said today it had achieved one of its key manifesto pledges to cut NHS waiting lists by 100,000. The Health Secretary Alan Milburn admitted there was still a long way to go. The Conservatives accused Labour of focusing on the wrong target and claimed that more patients are waiting for their first hospital appointments and treatment. A male nurse was found guilty at the Old Bailey today of killing a nursing sister whose drink he'd spiked with a stupefying drug. Kevin Cobb, aged 38, was also convicted of drugging and raping women patients brought into his accident department. Harry Smith reports.
This is the face of Kevin Cobb, described by police as an evil man, a nurse who drugged and raped his patients. He was working at the time at the Accident and Emergency Unit of St. Peter's Hospital in Surrey, where the rapes took place. It was only when police began to investigate these complaints that they discovered that Cobb was also a killer. His victim was fellow nurse Susan Annis, who'd been staying at the same nurses' home as Cobb, the London Brompton Hospital, 4 years earlier. Susan had a slight heart condition, and when Cobb spiked her drink, one night the combination of drug and alcohol killed her. As the jury returned its verdict, Cobb shook his head slowly from side to side. Susan's parents, sitting nearby, wept uncontrollably. Police say they still believe Cobb may have raped other women, some of whom may have been too drugged to be sure what had happened. The judge, Martin Stevens, said he would sentence Cobb only after he'd received psychiatric reports, but he warned him he faced an extremely long prison sentence. Harry Smith, ITN, at the Old Bailey.
The Prime Minister's wife, Cherie Blair, who's expecting her fourth baby any day now, went to the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital tonight. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said it was because she'd been feeling some discomfort, not because she'd gone into labour. The couple were at the hospital for about an hour, but are now back in Downing Street. A report in the British Medical Journal tomorrow is expected to confirm a connection between so-called Gulf War syndrome and the vaccines troops were given beforehand. More than 900 veterans of the conflict were studied in the biggest independent survey so far. Lauren Taylor reports.
Around 3,000 British troops out of the 53,000 who served in the Gulf have reported symptoms that became known as Gulf War syndrome. A number of possible causes have been investigated, but a study to be published tomorrow of 900 sufferers will implicate the vaccines given to soldiers.
We know from our own research some of the vaccines shouldn't be given in combination with the others. However, I'll be a little bit sceptical about the report because the Ministry of Defence haven't disclosed all the drugs and vaccines used.
Those who've examined the evidence from previous research are also cautious about the new findings. American soldiers did not have the same cocktail of vaccinations as their British counterparts, yet many of them developed similar symptoms.
I have a mixture of elation and scepticism. I've heard this before over the last 9 years of research being done in the UK and especially in the United States, and it hasn't yet proved to be the cause of the Gulf War syndrome.
The Defence Committee here at Westminster published its latest report into Gulf War illnesses only last week, and while MPs will welcome any extra research being done, until it can be properly assessed, they want the government to focus on improving the treatments and financial support that's being offered to those who are suffering. Lauren Taylor, ITN, Westminster.
ITV announced today that it will broadcast live coverage of the Queen Mother's 100th birthday pageant after the BBC decided not to show it. Coverage of the occasion on July the 19th will be produced by ITN. The pageant, like the one held for her 90th birthday, will be a tribute to the Queen Mother's life. Even though her birthday isn't until August the 4th, the pageant will be the main showpiece marking the event. And now back to tonight's dramatic UEFA Cup final in Copenhagen. It went to extra time and then penalties, which was where Arsenal came unstuck. Here's our sports correspondent, Graham Miller.
Both teams and the 38,000 travelling fans did their best inside the stadium to put aside the pre-match riots, but the 90 minutes were flat. Galatasaray looked the more likely early on, with one spectacular effort from Hakan Suker. Arsenal's best chance went to Mark Overmars. He took it well, but so did the keeper. Mind you, the Turkish champions had an even better one. Tony Adams played Arif onside, but with the goal at his mercy, he shot wide. Second half, similar story. Martin Keown and the post keeping Suker out this time. This period, though, was the best in the game. Arsenal looking more aggressive. Thierry Henry's pass excellent, only for Keown to show why he's a defender. It went to extra time with Taffarel performing miracles to keep Henry out, and that meant penalties. Arsenal substitute Davor Suker changed his mind and missed. Patrick Vieira managed to hit the bar. So this to win the cup for Galatasaray. Penalty kicks denying an English side another major trophy. Graham Miller, ITN Sport.
In tonight's Nationwide League playoffs, Ipswich kept their hopes of a return to the Premiership alive with a 5-3 win in extra time against Bolton. In Division 2, it was Gillingham 3, Stoke 0, and Wigan 1, Millwall 0. And in Division 3, Darlington beat Hartlepool 1-0, and Peterborough won 3-0 against Barnet. The headlines again: English and Turkish fans fought in Copenhagen today ahead of the UEFA Cup final between Arsenal and Galatasaray. And British troops were drawn into the fighting in Sierra Leone, killing 4 rebels. They're now helping guard the rebel leader, Fode Sanko, who was captured today. Tonight's financial figures: the FTSE 100 share index fell 122 points. In response to yesterday's American interest rate rise, internet stocks took a battering. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed 166 points lower, and the pound hit a 6-year low against the dollar, closing down another ½ cent. Now, a foretaste of what's in tomorrow's papers. The Telegraph leads with the shootout by British paratroopers in Sierra Leone. It pictures terrified onlookers caught up in the football violence in Copenhagen. Above that, it reports that farmers here have accidentally sown 30,000 acres of GM crops. The Times also has that GM crop story. It claims it follows a mistake by a Canadian seed exporter. Next to that, it shows a Galatasaray supporter being held back by Danish police. It also reports that President Clinton is considering returning to Oxford University. The Mirror concentrates on the Copenhagen clashes, picturing a Turkish fan with a knife and an axe handle. The Daily Mail leads on ITV's decision to broadcast live the Queen Mother's 100th birthday tribute. Inside, it has an interview with one of the victims of the nurse who was today found guilty of drugging and raping patients. And the Express also carries an interview with a woman patient it claims helped lead police to Kevin Cobb. And that's the news tonight. I'm back at 11 tomorrow from the entire ITV Nightly News team. Good night.
Hello, good evening. Well, I'm afraid summer's on hold for the time being, with more cool weather as we head towards the weekend. And the reason why: we've low pressure in charge with our weather. Come Friday, that'll be there out to the east, still exerting its influence. So it's very much a case of sunshine and showers, broken cloud, and these fresh winds as well. Now back to the moment to hand, and we've those showers pushing across from the west tonight. Dipping temperatures, in fact, as low as 5 or 6, and in the highlands we could possibly see some touches of frost. Into tomorrow morning on a promising note, a lot of sunshine around. That doesn't last. The sunshine in turn sets off those showers. So by afternoon it's a case of showers cropping up here, there and everywhere, some heavy, even some hail and thunder thrown in. Temperatures round about average for the time of year. 15 is 59 in Fahrenheit. Add on the wind and it'll feel all the cooler. So quick look now ahead to the weekend. A brief respite on Saturday, dry with some sunshine. But already by the end of the day we've rain pushing into the west. And then that pushes across the country early on Sunday. And that's more or less the way we expect the weekend to work out. Here's our summary.
Power Gen. Power, whatever the weather.
Good evening. Arsenal fans are commiserating each other tonight after the Gunners lost the UEFA Cup final. Pubs around the Highbury ground were packed for the match. Fans wept as the North London side went down 4-1 on penalties to the Turkish side, Galatasaray, in Copenhagen. The overwhelming feeling was disgust at the way Turkish fans had behaved in Copenhagen.
I'm sickened, really, to tell you the truth, not just because the Arsenal lost, but the way the Turks behave.
I'm very disappointed that it was down to penalties, but what can you do? But they should be banned because you can't go around stabbing people. It's a football game.
We've got a very bad reputation, I can understand that, but the Turks are worse, and the way I see it, they did not deserve tonight, they did not even, and they should be banned from competition football. That's all I've got to say.
Meanwhile, half a mile from Highbury, around 200 Turkish fans cheered their win. The celebrations were good-natured with no reports of violence. Police have been put on standby though. A male nurse has been found guilty of manslaughter, rape and drugging women. Kevin Cobb has denied 11 charges relating to the incidents at hospitals in London and Surrey. He's been remanded in custody for psychiatric reports before he's sentenced. The charges included the manslaughter of colleague Susan Annis, who died in November 1996 at a nurse's home at the Royal Brompton Hospital. Detectives praise London Tonight for publicising the case.
It gave us a tremendous opportunity to appeal to other possible victims that may have existed, and it was a result of the initial appeal in London Tonight that 2 other victims came forward and allowed us to strengthen the similar fact evidence which brought this matter to the court and gave us a successful conviction today.
The Ladbroke Grove disaster inquiry heard today from passengers who travelled in the now infamous Carriage H. They told of a fireball erupting moments after impact. One passenger saw her leg in flames. Another said the effect was like a flamethrower coming straight for me. 31 people died in the crash last October. Phil Bales reports.
Pamela Warren's continuing suffering is plain to see. Her hands and face were badly burned and are now scarred. She needs constant care. Neither she nor her husband can work. Now she fights for the safety of other passengers.
Ladbroke Grove can happen again today unless something gets done and gets done quickly.
Pamela Warren was in coach H on the Paddington-bound express. A huge jolt, screaming, furniture flying about. Then a massive fireball tore through the carriage. She tried to protect her face with her hands, looked down, and her leg was on fire. She beat out the flames with her hands. Sitting close to her, Keith Stiles, a London Underground manager and Chelsea Football Club scout. The fireball set him alight. He tried desperately to extinguish the flames with his jacket.
So I literally pulled the jacket down, smothered the flames, and then I think I rolled out the window to safety. To see flames coming at you and not being able to move out the way is pretty horrific, and that memory I can remember every day.
The terrible physical injuries suffered by many of the passengers will leave lasting physical memories of what they endured. Not so obvious, the psychological consequences of what they went through.
Even people that weren't physically hurt like me are going through exactly the same mental anguish, nightmares at night, flashbacks during the day. And for somebody to pick up your life and turn it around and destroy it like this, somebody has to be accountable. Somebody made a decision to allow those 2 trains on the same track, and it's that person we ought to be looking for responsibility.
After the crash, Pamela Warren couldn't speak. Her mouth, voice box and lungs were burned. This is Phil Bales for London Tonight.
A bill to outlaw unlicensed hot dog sellers has been adjourned in the House of Commons. The vendors are allowed to operate in London's royal parks due to a loophole in the law. The Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst, Eric Forth, pledged to wreck the royal parks bill, claiming it had been badly drafted and could stir up racial hatred amongst the sellers, many of whom are Eastern European. Police investigating the murder of Hertfordshire mother Sharon Malone have arrested a man and a woman in London. Mrs. Malone's remains were found in woods in March, 4 months after she disappeared from home. Her husband Gary, who had appealed for her safe return, disappeared soon after her death, taking their 2 sons with him. Police later managed to trace him and the children. Detectives investigating the murder of Anne Cook have been inundated with calls since her identical twin appealed for help to catch the killer. Miss Cook, who was 35, was stabbed in the chest as she walked her dog in Watford in Hertfordshire 9 days ago. Posh Spice, Victoria Beckham, has admitted she is too thin. The pop star has been told she is 1.5 stone underweight by doctors. Since giving birth to her son Brooklyn 14 months ago, Victoria's weight has dropped to 7.5 stone, sparking rumours she's anorexic. But the 26-year-old says she eats regular meals, including takeaways and snacks. And that's it for now. We're back with bulletins in GMTV from 6:10 in the morning. Until then, have a very good night.
Carlton Weather, sponsored by amarada.co.uk, suppliers of gas and electricity.
Hello there once again. It's cloudy skies at the moment, still got a number of showers around. No real problems with temperatures, no lower than 8 degrees tonight. Still that breeze though, making its presence felt. So we're going to tomorrow morning on a fairly promising note. Plenty of sunshine. It doesn't last, I'm afraid. What it does is sets off those showers, and by afternoon it's a case of sunshine as well as showers. Some of those really heavy, even hail and thunder mixed in as well. Temperatures might look quite normal. 15 is 59 in Fahrenheit. Add on the wind and feeling just a tad chilly. So a quick look ahead now to the rest of the weekend. Friday, it's more of the same, sunshine and showers, a brief respite on Saturday, then rain pushing across the region Saturday night. So it's a wet Sunday with a glimmer or two of sunshine. That's all from me.
Carlton Weather, sponsored by amarada.co.uk.